N Chapter 12, Cardiovascular System Disorders /N/N Key terms /Nadrenergic Anastomosis Angioplasty Askhoff Bodius Auscultation Autoregulation Baroreceptors Bradycardia Cardiomegaly Depolarization Ectopus Electrodes Endarterectomy Hemoptysis Micro /N/N Chapter Outline /N/N Review /N Chapter 12, Cardiovascular System Disorders /N/N Key terms /Nadrenergic Anastomosis Angioplasty Askhoff Bodius Auscultation Autoregulation Baroreceptors Bradycardia Cardiomegaly Depolarization Ectopus Electrodes Endarterectomy Hemoptysis Micro /N/N Chapter Outline /N/N Review of the Cardiovascular System /N/N Heart /N Blood pressure /N/N Heart disorders /N Aneurysms, Chapter 10, /N Kidney dysfunction, Chapter 18, /N eye damage leading to vision loss, Chapter 15, /N metabolic problems that can lead to anemia, Chapter 17, /N trouble with memory or understanding, Chapter 14, /N dementia, Chapter 14, /N N N Heart /N Anatomy N The heart functions as the pump for the circulating blood in both the pulmonary and systemic circulations. The path of a specific component of the blood, such as a red blood cell, through the heart and circulation is illustrated in Fig 12.1. /N Fig 12.1 Path of erythrocyte in the circulation. O2, oxygen /N anatomical diagram illustrating the complete circulatory pathway of erythrocytes through both pulmonary and systemic circulation systems. The top section shows oxygen being added to hemoglobin in the lungs, with arrows indicating blood flow through the pulmonary circulation. The heart is centrally positioned, showing all four chambers, right atrium and left atrium in the upper portion, and right ventricle and left ventricle in the lower portion. Key cardiac structures are labeled, including the pulmonary artery extending from the right ventricle to the lungs, pulmonary vein returning oxygenated blood from lungs to left atrium, mitral valve or bicuspid valve between left atrium and left ventricle, tricuspid valve between right atrium and right ventricle, aortic valve or semilunar valve at the base of the aorta, and pulmonary valve or semilunar valve at the base of the pulmonary artery. The inferior vena cava enters the right atrium from below. The systemic circulation section shows the pathway through major organ systems including brain, kidneys, digestive tract, skeletal muscle, and skin, all connected by arterial and venous networks. The bottom portion indicates where oxygen is lost from hemoglobin as erythrocytes deliver oxygen to tissues. Directional arrows throughout the diagram demonstrate the continuous circulation of blood, with purple arrows showing deoxygenated blood flow and red arrows indicating oxygenated blood flow through the cardiovascular system /N. The heart is located in the mediastinum between the lungs and is enclosed in the double-walled pericardial sac, see Fig 18.14, presented later in the chapter. The outer fibrous pericardium anchors the heart to the diaphragm. The visceral pericardium, also called the epicardium, consists of a serous membrane that provides a small amount of lubricating fluid within the pericardial cavity between the two pericardial membranes to facilitate heart movements. The middle layer of the heart is the myocardium, composed of specialized cardiac muscle cells that contract rhythmically and forcefully to pump blood throughout the organs. The left ventricular wall is thicker because it must eject blood into the extensive systemic circulation. The inner layer of the heart is the endocardium, which also forms the four heart valves that separate the chambers of the heart and ensure one-way flow of blood /N. The atrioventricular, AV, valves separate the atria from the ventricles. They comprise, on the right side, the tricuspid valve with 3 leaflets or cusps, and on the left side, the mitral or bicuspid valve with 2 leaflets. The semilunar valves, each with 3 cusps, include the aortic and pulmonary valves located at the exits to the large arteries from the ventricles. The septum separates the left and right sides of the heart /N/N/N conduction system /N. Impulses to initiate cardiac contractions are conducted along specialized myocardial, cardiac muscle, fibers. No nerves are present within the cardiac muscle. The unique characteristics of cardiac muscle include the presence of intercalated discs at the junctions between fibers. These discs contain desmosomes, connections to prevent muscle cells from separating during contraction, and gap junctions, which permit ions to pass from cell to cell, facilitating rapid transmission of impulses. These specialized structures ensure that all muscle fibers of the 2 atria normally contract together, followed shortly by the 2 ventricles. This coordinated effort results in a rhythmic and efficient filling and emptying of the atria and ventricles that has sufficient force to sustain the flow of blood through the body /N. The pathway for impulses in the cardiac conduction system is as follows /N/N/N. All cardiac muscle cells can initiate impulses, but normally the conduction pathway originates at the sinoatrial SA node, often called the pacemaker, located in the wall of the right atrium /N. The SA node automatically generates impulses at the basic rate, called the sinus rhythm, 70 beats per minute, but this can be altered by autonomic nervous system fibers that innervate the SA node and by circulating hormones such as epinephrine /N from the SA node. Impulses then spread through the atrial conduction pathways, resulting in contraction of both atria /N. The impulses then arrive at the AV node, located in the floor of the right atrium near the septum. This is the only anatomic connection between the atrial and ventricular portions of the conduction system /N. There is a slight delay in conduction at the AV node to allow for complete ventricular filling, then the impulses continue into the ventricle through the AV bundle of His, the right and left bundle branches, and the terminal Purkinje network of fibers, stimulating the simultaneous contraction of the 2 ventricles /N/N. Conduction of impulses produces a change in electrical activity that can be picked up by electrodes attached to the skin at various points on the body surface, producing the electrocardiogram, ECG, Fig 12.2. The atrial contraction is represented by the depolarization in the P wave, and the ventricular contraction is shown by the large wave of depolarization in the ventricles, the QRS wave. This wave masks the effect of atrial repolarization, but the third wave, the T wave, represents the repolarization of the ventricles, or recovery phase. Abnormal variations in the ECG known as arrhythmias or dysrhythmias may indicate acute problems, such as an infarction, or systemic problems, such as electrolyte imbalances, example potassium deficiency, see Fig 2.8. /N Fig 12.2 Schematic drawing of the conducting system of the heart. An impulse normally is generated in the sinus node and travels through the atria to the atrioventricular node, down the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers, and to the ventricular myocardium. Recording of the depolarizing and repolarizing currents in the heart with electrodes on the surface of the body produces characteristic wave forms. From Kopstedt-Kirchhorn L.E., Banasic J.L., Pathophysiology, ed. 4, Philadelphia, 2009, Saunders. /N Anatomical diagram illustrating the electrical conducting system of the heart with corresponding electrocardiogram waveform. The cross-sectional heart diagram shows the sinoatrial node located in the right atrium near the superior vena cava, labeled as the natural pacemaker. The pulmonary artery extends from the right ventricle, while the left atrium is positioned on the upper left. Internodal pathways are shown as green lines connecting the sinoatrial node to the atrioventricular node, which is located between the atria and ventricles near the septum. The atrioventricular bundle, also known as the bundle of His, extends from the atrioventricular node down through the interventricular septum, branching into left and right bundle branches that spread throughout the ventricular myocardium via Purkinje fibers. The right ventricle and left ventricle are clearly labeled in the lower portion of the heart. To the right of the anatomical diagram is an electrocardiogram tracing showing the characteristic waveforms, the P wave representing atrial excitation, the QRS complex indicating excitation of ventricles begins with initial downward deflection as Q wave, and the T wave showing ventricular repolarization. The diagram effectively demonstrates how electrical impulses generated in the sinoatrial node travel through specialized conduction pathways to coordinate heart muscle contraction, with the corresponding electrical activity recorded as characteristic waveforms on the electrocardiogram \n\n\n\n\n control of the heart \n heart rate and force of contraction are controlled by the cardiac control center in the medulla of the brain. The baroreceptors in the walls of the aorta and internal carotid arteries detect changes in blood pressure, and the cardiac center then responds through stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, or the parasympathetic nervous system to alter the rate and force of cardiac contractions as required. Sympathetic innervation increases heart rate, tachycardia, and contractility, whereas parasympathetic stimulation by the vagus nerve slows the heart rate, bradycardia. The sympathetic or beta-1 adrenergic receptors in the heart, see Chapter 14, are an important site of action for some drugs, such as beta blockers. Because beta blockers fit the receptors and prevent normal SNS stimulation, they are used to block any increases in rate and force of contractions after the heart has been damaged. \n factors that increase heart rate include the following: \n elevated body temperature, such as in fever, \n increased environmental temperatures, especially if humidity is high, \n exertion or exercise, notably when beginning, followed by a leveling off, \n smoking even one cigarette, \n stress response, \n pregnancy, \n pain, \n medications, \n glycogen levels, \n dehydration. Any stimulation of the SNS, as with stress, increases the secretion of epinephrine, which in turn stimulates beta receptors and increases both the heart rate and contractility. \n think about 12.1 \n Where is the mitral valve located? Describe the direction and type of blood, oxygenated or non-oxygenated, that flows through this valve. \nb list two functions of the atrioventricular node. \nc describe the control of heart rate during and after exercise. \n coronary circulation. \n cardiac muscle requires a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients to conduct impulses and contract efficiently, but it has very little storage capacity for oxygen. \n the distribution of the major blood vessels in the coronary circulation is as follows: \n\n1. Two major arteries, the right and left coronary arteries, branch off the aorta immediately above the aortic valve, Fig 12.3. \n\n. Fig 12.3 Coronary arteries. From Fraser M., Trzymowski J., Essentials of Human Disease and Conditions, ed. 6, St. Louis, 2016, Elsevier. \n\n\n\n2. The left coronary artery soon divides into the left anterior descending or interventricular artery, which follows the anterior interventricular sulcus or groove downward over the surface of the heart, and the left circumflex artery, which circles the exterior of the heart in the left AV sulcus /N3. Similarly, the right coronary artery follows the right AV sulcus on the posterior surface of the heart and branches into the right marginal artery and the posterior interventricular artery, and then descends in the posterior interventricular groove toward the apex of the heart, where it comes close to the terminal point of the left anterior descending artery. The passage of arteries over the surface of the heart in these grooves is helpful because it permits surgical replacement of obstructed arteries with bypasses using sections of other veins or arteries, see Fig 12.12, presented later in the chapter, for a diagram of a bypass, /N4. Many small branches extend inward from these large arteries to supply the myocardium and endocardium. Blood flow through the myocardium is greatest during diastole or relaxation and is reduced during systole or contraction as the contracting muscle compresses the arteries. Thus, rapid or prolonged contractions can reduce the blood supply to the cardiac muscle cells /N/N/N anastomosis, or direct connections, exist between small branches of the left and right coronary arteries near the apex, as well as in other areas in which branches are nearby, see Fig 12.3. These junctions have the potential to open up and provide another source of blood to an area. Collateral circulation, alternative source of blood and nutrients, is important if an artery becomes obstructed. When obstruction develops gradually, more capillaries from nearby arteries tend to enlarge or extend into adjacent tissues to meet the metabolic needs of the cells. Regular aerobic exercise contributes to cardiovascular fitness by stimulating the development of collateral channels /non-AV interference with blood flow will affect heart function, depending on the specific area supplied by that artery. Generally, the right coronary artery supplies the right side of the heart and the inferior portion of the left ventricle, as well as the posterior interventricular septum. The left anterior descending artery brings blood to the anterior wall of the ventricles, the anterior septum, and the bundle branches, and the circumflex artery nourishes the left atrium and the lateral and posterior walls of the left ventricle. The source of blood for the SA node depends on the specific position of the arteries, which varies in individuals. The SA node is supplied by the right coronary artery in slightly more than half the population and by the left circumflex artery in the remainder. The AV node is nourished primarily by the right coronary artery. This information implies that blockage of the right coronary artery is more likely to result in conduction disturbances of the AV node, resulting in dysrhythmias, whereas interference with the blood supply to the left coronary artery will most likely impair the pumping capability of the left ventricle, potentially leading to congestive heart failure CHF. /N The course of the coronary or cardiac veins generally parallels that of the arteries, with a majority of the blood returning to the coronary sinus and emptying directly into the right atrium /N Napoli Your Knowledge 12.1 /N Predict 3 basic ways that cardiac function could be impaired /N /N Cardiac cycle /N The cardiac cycle refers to the alternating sequence of diastole, the relaxation phase of cardiac activity, and systole, or cardiac contraction, which is coordinated by the conduction system for maximum efficiency, Fig 12.4 /N Fig 12.4 Cardiac cycle. AV, atrioventricular /N illustration of the cardiac cycle, showing the sequential stages of heart function divided into two rows. In the first row, left to right, 1 diastole, with atria filling and all valves closed, 2 diastole continues with increased atrial pressure opening AV valves and ventricles filling, 3 systole begins with atria contracting and ventricles full. In the second row, right to left, 4 systole continues with ventricles contracting and AV valves closing, 5 systole with increased ventricular pressure, opening aortic and pulmonary valves, blood ejected, and 6 diastole again with ventricles emptying and valves closed. The direction of the cyclic process is shown by arrows from 1 to 6 \n\n\n\n1. The cycle begins with the two atria relaxed and filling with blood, from the inferior and superior venae cavae into the right atrium, and from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium.